The cruelest silence is the one they pretend not to hear until it becomes the only sound in their head. They'll act like it doesn't faze them, like they're unbothered, untouched, completely detached from your absence. But here's the truth, my friends, they're not over it. They're just really, really good at pretending, because the ego hates to admit what the heart still craves. The moment you go quiet, they start performing. But that performance, it's not power, it's panic in disguise. Hey folks, imagine this. Imagine standing in a room full of people and you suddenly walk out without saying a word. At first, everyone keeps laughing, joking, pretending they didn't notice. But slowly, eyes start glancing toward the door, whispers start, minds begin to wonder, why'd they leave? That, my friends, is what your silence does to the people who pretended not to care. At first, they act like it's nothing. But silence? Silence is like a missing puzzle piece. It doesn't scream, it haunts. They thought they'd moved on, but now they're checking your stories, rereading your last message, laughing a little louder in their posts, not because they're happy, but because they need you to believe they are. That's the thing about people who pretend not to care. They care the most, but only when you stop showing them that you do. You used to give them everything, your time, your emotions, your explanations, your loyalty, and they fed off it like royalty at a feast. But now the table's empty, and their ego, starving. They never expected you to flip the script, to go silent, to evolve, to stop chasing and start rising, because they only knew the version of you who stayed, who begged, who fought. This version, this new energy, it's foreign to them, and what we don't understand, we fear. They'll try to act cool, shrug it off, but silence isn't a game you play, it's a power you earn. When you stop explaining, you stop feeding their fantasy that they still have control, and that drives them insane. It's like taking away the mirror they used to see their reflection in. Now they're just left with shadows and questions. And that uncertainty is the ego's worst nightmare. You want to know when they'll break? Not when you blocked them, not when you cried, not when you begged. They'll break the moment you stop playing the role they wrote for you. Because the second you go off script, their illusion collapses. And what replaces it? Obsession, overthinking, regret, curiosity, all the emotions they swore they were too strong to feel. My friends, don't chase closure. Don't chase apologies. Chase nothing but your own glow. Because when they realize you're not waiting anymore, when they see that your silence wasn't a phase but a decision, that's when it starts to burn. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. Let them pretend, let them perform, let them think they're winning, because while they're busy trying to prove they don't miss you, you're becoming the version of yourself they'll never have access to again. So right now, drop this in the comments. I don't chase. Say it loud, say it proud, and remind yourself that your silence is your superpower. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because this story isn't over. It's only just beginning. Number 1. The game of pretending. Why they wear the mask of indifference. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's punishment, because the quiet is where the truth screams the loudest. They'll walk away like they don't feel a thing, smirk like you never mattered, post like they're living their best life. But don't let the illusion fool you. People only pretend when they're trying to protect something fragile inside. And most of the time, that fragile thing is their ego. They didn't expect your silence. They expected you to fall apart without them. They expected chaos, drama, an emotional breakdown they could gossip about. But when you gave them none of that, it didn't confirm their strength. It exposed their fear. It's like watching someone laugh at a burning house while trying to convince you it's a party. They act unbothered, but you can smell the smoke. The mask of indifference looks strong, but it's just paper-thin armor covering a collapsing pride. What they fear most isn't your anger, it's your absence. Because anger still means you care. Silence? Silence means you're done. And done is something they never prepared for. In the quiet, they start to wonder, did they really move on? Do they even think about me anymore? Did I matter at all? That's the thing about silence. It doesn't answer questions. It creates them. And the human mind is ruthless when left alone with questions it can't control. Their confidence begins to crumble, not because you screamed at them, but because you didn't say a word. And here's what they don't want to admit. They needed your validation. Every text, every argument, every emotional plea was proof that they still mattered. It fed their illusion of power. But now, you've cut the supply. And when someone's entire identity is built on being chased, your stillness is the most painful rejection they've ever felt. Because now they're not just losing you, they're losing who they believed they were to you. Let's break the lie. They didn't stop caring. They just hoped you'd never stop showing that you cared more. It's easy to look strong when someone else is doing all the emotional heavy lifting, but the moment you drop it, the cracks start to show. The late-night scrolling, the sudden interest in your stories, the indirect posts. They're not coincidences. They're silent cries masked as moving on. And yes, it's hard. It's hard not to respond when you know they're watching. It's hard not to send that message when your heart is screaming for closure. But this is where your growth is born, in the fire of discomfort, in the storm of unanswered questions. Because your silence isn't about ignoring them, it's about choosing you. Every second you hold back from chasing is a second you pour back into your own healing, your own glow, your own power. As Epictetus once said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And my friend, their validation is beyond your control. You don't need their apology. You don't need their explanation. You need your power back. And sometimes that power doesn't come from saying more. It comes from becoming more. Let them wear their mask. Let them act. Because behind every performance of not caring is a quiet desperation to be noticed. They'll pretend they're fine until your silence starts echoing louder than your presence ever did. Until the mask gets too heavy to hold. Until pretending becomes exhausting. That's when the illusion starts to fade. And what's left? Regret. The realization that they had something real, and they threw it away, believing it would wait forever. They'll say, you changed. And they're right. You did. But not for them, for yourself. You changed from someone who explained everything to someone who owes no explanation. You changed from someone who begged to be seen to someone who walks away when unseen. You changed from their backup plan to your own priority. And maybe that scares them. Good. Because they were never meant to feel safe in your silence. They were meant to feel what they made you feel. Uncertainty, doubt, fear of loss. Not because you're playing games, but because you finally stopped playing theirs. This isn't revenge. This is rebirth. Right now, I want you to take a deep breath and remind yourself, I am not who they left. I am who I chose to become after they did. And if you feel that, if you're living that, then drop this in the comments right now. I don't chase. Say it like a declaration. Say it for your past self who begged for answers. Say it for your future self who will never accept less than they deserve. Number 2, your detachment is the earthquake they didn't predict. The most dangerous shift is the one they don't see coming until the ground starts shaking beneath their ego. They thought you'd always be there. that no matter how far they pushed, how cold they acted, or how long they disappeared, you'd still be waiting with open arms and tired eyes. They were so sure of your loyalty, they mistook it for weakness. But what they didn't realize is that every time you stayed, a piece of you was silently preparing to leave. And when you finally did, without warning, without explanation, it wasn't just an exit, it was an earthquake. Because detachment doesn't announce itself. It builds in silence. It's the quiet pause before the storm, the slow withdrawal they pretend not to notice, until one day they look around and realize you're gone. And not just physically, energetically, emotionally, spiritually. Your detachment isn't about blocking them or erasing them. It's about outgrowing the version of yourself that ever needed their attention in the first place. They were expecting chaos, drama, one last emotional explosion to give them something to hold on to, but instead you gave them peace. And peace is terrifying to someone who only understands power through pain. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't fight to stay. They don't know how to process silence that doesn't seek closure. And that confusion, that's the tremor under their feet. The more you pull back, the louder their panic becomes, though they'll never admit it. Detachment isn't indifference. It's deeper, it's stronger. It's when you still care, but you care more about yourself. It's when you finally choose clarity over chaos. It's when you realize that being available to the wrong person is the real form of abandonment. Abandoning your own peace, your own worth, your own glow, just to be enough for someone who didn't even try to match your effort. They won't say it out loud, they'll play it cool, but inside they're crumbling, because you were their emotional compass, even if they pretended not to follow it. Your energy held them up, your effort made them feel important, and now that you've detached, their world is a little colder, a little quieter, and a lot emptier. That's what detachment does. It removes the supply. And when someone's entire sense of importance came from being needed, your silence becomes a threat to their identity. They thought they had time, they thought they had control. But your detachment was the one variable they never accounted for. And that's why it hits so hard. It breaks the illusion. Suddenly, they're not the one walking away anymore. You are. And they don't know how to follow silence. They don't know how to fight someone who stopped playing the game, because now every step you take in silence is a reminder that they were never as important to your future as they thought they were. And sure, the fear will creep in for you too. You'll question if you made the right decision. You'll wonder if silence is the right path. Because when you've been conditioned to prove your worth, detachment feels unnatural, like holding your breath underwater, waiting for the moment you're allowed to gasp. But the longer you hold, the more you realize you're not drowning, you're finally breathing. Let's break the lie they told you. That detachment means you didn't love deeply. No, it means you loved too deeply for too long in a place that didn't know how to receive it. It means you finally realized that love isn't meant to be proven, it's meant to be mirrored. You didn't give up, you woke up. And that awakening, that's what they're afraid of, because they built their self-esteem on being chased, on being the one who decides when you get a reply, on being the person who withholds just enough to keep you questioning. But now, the tables have turned, and it's them watching you slip away, slowly, quietly, without begging, without warning. That's the earthquake, and no mask of indifference can survive the aftershock. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca said, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. You wasted enough time trying to explain your worth to someone who refused to understand it. Now, your detachment is proof that you've stopped wasting your most valuable resource, yourself. Don't mistake their silence for strength. It's panic, dressed as pride. It's chaos, hiding behind stillness. And the longer you stay detached, the more they feel it. Every day you don't reach out chips away at their illusion of control. Every moment you don't explain your silence forces them to face the one fear they've buried deep. That maybe, just maybe, they were never as unforgettable as they thought. And you're becoming unforgettable in the best way, not because of how much you gave, but because of how gracefully you let go. Because your detachment isn't just a reaction, it's a rebirth. You're no longer reacting to their disrespect. You're rising from it, and every move you make in silence echoes louder than 1,000 desperate texts ever could. They expected a storm. You gave them an earthquake. They thought you'd fight for the past. You're building a future they'll never be a part of. And that future, it's not just your revenge, it's your reward. Right now, I want you to drop this in the comments. I am the earthquake, because you are. You shook the ground they stood on without raising your voice. You shattered the illusion they hid behind without lifting a finger. And you rebuilt yourself on a foundation that doesn't need anyone's approval to stand tall. This is what detachment looks like. Not bitterness, not revenge, but power. Quiet, undeniable, untouchable power. The kind they never saw coming, and the kind they'll never recover from. Stay silent, stay rising, stay unshakable. Number 3. The mind always breaks in silence, not in noise. Noise distracts. Silence destroys. Because silence forces the mind to answer questions it's not ready to ask. You think they're fine, right? Because they haven't said a word. Because they haven't called. Because they're posting sunsets and selfies like the world is untouched. But that's the illusion. That's the performance. That's the game people play when they don't want you to see the war going on inside their head. Because the truth is, they're not breaking in the noise, they're breaking in the silence. You see, noise can be managed. It can be muted. Words can be spun, twisted, misinterpreted. You can argue with words. You can defend yourself against them. But silence isn't a conversation, it's a confrontation with their own thoughts, their own guilt, their own loss. And the moment you stopped responding, the battle didn't end, it began. Imagine this. They're sitting there, scrolling through their phone, fully expecting a message, a paragraph, a reaction, some desperate sign that you're still holding on. But nothing. No calls. No texts, no sad quotes to decode, no digital breadcrumbs to follow, just silence. At first, they feel relief. They convince themselves you've finally moved on, that you're not strong enough to stay away. But day by day, that comfort turns to confusion, then concern, then obsession. Because silence doesn't stay empty. The human mind fills in the blanks. It begins to craft stories, scenarios, answers, and it always fills them with fear. Are they over me? Did they meet someone new? Were they faking it the whole time? The longer your silence holds, the louder those questions get. And they won't say it out loud, but they're drowning in them. They'll check your social media, pretending it's casual. They'll revisit your old messages, trying to find proof that they still mattered. They'll replay memories in their head, trying to figure out if you were ever truly attached, or if they were the only one feeling something real. But that's the paradox of silence. It forces the one who walked away to question if they were ever worth staying for. And let's be honest, it's not that they miss you because you're gone. They miss you because you're silent. You're not giving them the comfort of knowing what you're thinking. You've removed the mirror they used to see their reflection in, and now they're stuck with themselves, their own reflection, their own regret, their own internal noise echoing back at them, and there's nowhere to run. You used to comfort them with your presence. Now they're haunted by your absence. That's how the mind breaks. Not in the explosion of a fight, but in the quiet implosion of uncertainty. They scroll past your page, pretending not to look. But they're watching. Every story, every subtle change. Not because they care about what you're doing, but because they're terrified you're doing just fine without them. This is what they never prepared for. This is what their ego didn't account for. They thought their silence would make you panic. They thought pulling back would make you chase. But when you didn't respond, you didn't fall into the trap. They fell into their own. Now they're stuck, not in love, in limbo, in questions, in fear. And that's a prison no door can open from the outside. Don't believe the lie that silence makes you weak, that not reaching out means you never cared. Caring isn't about how loud you can scream. It's about how strong you are in the quiet. Silence is the ultimate test of self-worth, because it says, I don't need to prove anything anymore. And when someone's expecting proof, that unspoken sentence hits harder than anything you could have written. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's exactly what your silence does. It pulls the power away from the external, from the performance, from the emotional circus they're trying to host, and it brings it back to where it belongs, inside you. But yes, staying silent is hard, especially when you were once the one who fixed things, the one who chased peace, the one who broke your own boundaries just to rebuild someone else's comfort. But this time is different. This time, you're letting silence do the work for you. You're letting them sit in the very uncertainty they fed you. You're letting their own thoughts teach them what your words never could. Because silence is not absence. It's presence at a deeper level. It's showing up for yourself in a way that says, I'm no longer shrinking to be heard. And once they start to realize that, it doesn't just drive them insane. It rewrites their entire understanding of who you are. They thought you were emotional, you're strategic. They thought you were weak, you're disciplined. They thought you'd wait, you walked. And that walking, that's not just movement, that's evolution, that's growth. That's you stepping into a version of yourself that no longer needs closure to close a chapter. And that is what will keep them up at night. Because the truth is, they expected a breakdown. What they're witnessing is a breakthrough, not theirs, yours. They're watching someone they thought they controlled slip through their fingers, not with rage, not with tears, but with quiet certainty, with a silence so strong it doesn't scream pain, it radiates power. So if you're holding that silence, if you're walking through that tension, if every day you choose not to send that message that would make things easier but undo your healing, I see you and I respect you. Right now, drop this in the comments. My silence speaks volumes. Say it for yourself. Say it for the version of you that once begged to be understood. Say it to remind yourself that the loudest message you'll ever send doesn't need a single word. They'll act like it's nothing now. But just wait. The mind always breaks in silence, not in noise. Stay still, stay calm, stay rising. The real shift is already happening, and they're the only ones who can hear it. Number 4, when you stop proving, they start regretting. The day you stop proving your worth is the day they're forced to confront their own emptiness. There comes a moment, quiet, subtle and often unnoticed by them at first, when you simply stop. Stop explaining. Stop chasing. Stop trying to convince someone that your love, your presence, your energy was ever worth holding on to. That moment, that's when it all begins to collapse for them, because they weren't expecting the shift. They were expecting more of the same, more apologies, more emotional labor, more desperate attempts to keep the connection alive. But instead, you gave them something they never saw coming. Nothing. And nothing is what drives them insane. You were their constant reassurance. Even in your pain, you gave them comfort. Even in their silence, you sent messages. Even when you knew they weren't matching your energy, you still gave them chances to rise. You explained your heart over and over, like a teacher standing in front of a student who refused to learn but loved the attention. And now that the lessons have stopped, they're panicking. Because when you stop proving, it doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you finally realized that the more you tried to prove your worth, the more they believed they had the power to doubt it. That's the twisted irony of one-sided loyalty. Your effort becomes their excuse to stay complacent. And now that the effort is gone, so is the illusion that they were always in control. They may not admit it, but deep down, they feel it. The regret, the sudden awareness that the version of you who loved without hesitation, who forgave without conditions, who stayed without requirements, that version is gone. And not temporarily. You didn't pause. You ended the contract. You see, people get comfortable in your consistency. They memorize your patterns. They'll always text back. They'll reach out first. They'll understand. So when you suddenly deviate from that script, when the pattern breaks, they don't just feel surprised. They feel exposed. Because they weren't investing in you. They were betting on your need for them. And now that you've stopped playing that role, they're left with nothing to hold on to but their own fading importance. At first, they may try to act unbothered. They'll act like your silence doesn't affect them. But the performance only lasts so long. Regret doesn't hit like a wave. It builds like a storm, quietly, slowly, until one day it crashes. They start thinking about every time you reached out when they didn't deserve it. Every time you stayed when you should have left. Every time you lowered your voice to keep the peace while they raised theirs to win an argument. Those memories don't vanish, they sharpen. And in the silence, those memories are all they have. Because now, without your messages, your voice, your presence, they're starting to see just how much space you really took up in their world. And it's in your absence that your value starts to scream. You didn't have to prove anything anymore. Your silence became the proof. They're beginning to realize that what they called clingy was actually commitment. What they called emotional was actually depth. What they called too much was actually a level of love they weren't ready to receive, but didn't have the courage to walk away from, so they mistreated it instead. It's hard for them to face that. It's hard to look in the mirror and admit they didn't lose you because you stopped loving them. They lost you because they didn't know how to love you back. And your silence is reflecting all of it back to them, not with words, not with confrontation, but with the most deafening thing you've ever done, your decision to stop explaining. You're no longer available for debates about your worth, no longer offering emotional discounts to people who can't afford the full price of your presence. You've finally realized that love is not something to beg for, it's something to align with. And that shift, that rising, it shakes their entire perception of you. They used to believe you needed them. Now they're wondering if they ever truly had you. And that doubt, that burning question, is what makes regret so unbearable. Because the worst kind of pain isn't realizing you lost something. It's realizing you never fully appreciated it until it became untouchable. And that's what you've become. Not out of revenge, but out of evolution. You've evolved into someone who no longer needs to prove their loyalty, their effort, their heart. Because everything you once tried to say with words, you're now showing through silence, through distance, through glow. You're not chasing peace anymore. You've become it. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. And what you've done, whether they realize it or not, is become someone who no longer waits for recognition. You're no longer addicted to being understood. You've accepted that not everyone deserves a front row seat to your transformation. But here's the part they'll never see coming. When they finally decide to return, to send that message, to test the waters, you won't be waiting. And that's not bitterness, that's boundaries. They'll reach for the version of you they left behind, only to find out that version doesn't live here anymore. They'll regret not listening when you were still speaking. They'll regret not showing up when you were still fighting. They'll regret underestimating someone who would have walked through fire for them, because now that same person won't even strike a match. Right now, I want you to take a deep breath and remind yourself, my silence is my healing. And if that hits deep, write it in the comments, not just as words, but as a declaration. Show them, show yourself, show the world. You're not proving anymore, you're becoming. They thought your silence was weakness. They're about to learn its power, and that regret they're carrying, that's not your burden to fix. That's theirs to sit in, because when you stop proving, they start remembering. And what they remember will never match who you've become. Number 5. How your absence rewires their perception of you. You don't need to change their mind. You just need to remove your presence, and their mind will do the rest. There's something powerful that happens when you disappear, not dramatically, not bitterly, but quietly, with no announcement, no final plea, no long goodbye. You simply stop showing up, and at first they pretend not to notice. They tell themselves you're being dramatic, that you'll be back, that your silence is temporary. But over time, the absence begins to do what your presence never could. It rewires how they see you. Because the truth is, people don't see your worth when you're always available. They see comfort, they see familiarity. And the human brain gets lazy with what's consistent. They convince themselves they knew you inside and out. They thought they had you figured out. But now, they're second-guessing everything, every memory, every message, every version of you they thought was guaranteed. You used to fight for their attention. Now they're wondering why you're not fighting at all. That shift doesn't just confuse them, it rewrites the story they were telling themselves about you, the version where you needed them, the version where they had the upper hand, the version where you were always chasing. That narrative doesn't match the silence you're holding now, and when the story no longer fits, the mind scrambles to make sense of it. Your absence is the glitch in their ego's matrix, and glitches, they demand attention. They demand answers. Suddenly, they're questioning what they used to dismiss. Were they really that into me? Did I make a mistake? Were they just waiting to leave? That doubt is the beginning of the unraveling, because the moment they stop being sure of how much you needed them, they start realizing how much they actually needed you. Absence is not emptiness, it's reflection, and the longer they sit in it, the more they start seeing you not as the person they took for granted, but as the person they now can't replace. You've become unfamiliar, mysterious, even intimidating. Not because you changed everything overnight, but because they're now seeing who you were the entire time, through the painful clarity of hindsight. They start revisiting old conversations, not to relive joy, but to find answers. They study your tone, your patterns, your effort, trying to piece together what they missed, trying to locate the exact moment you began slipping away. But the tragedy of regret is that it always arrives too late to change anything. Your absence isn't just quiet, it's a mirror, and what they see staring back at them is their own failure to appreciate what they had. You were never clingy, you were consistent, you weren't desperate, you were loyal. And what they once mocked as too emotional now haunts them as the very depth they can't seem to find in anyone else. They're realizing the things they rolled their eyes at were the same things that made you irreplaceable, and every time they reach for those same emotional highs in someone else, it falls flat. Because you weren't just another chapter, You were the plot twist. Now their perception is spiraling because you're no longer acting how they expect. You're not showing weakness. You're not seeking closure. You're not feeding the narrative they built. And that confuses them, because when someone can't define you, they obsess over you. Your absence leaves a blank page in their mind, and blank pages demand to be written on. So they start writing, creating stories, some flattering, some bitter, some delusional, but all rooted in one undeniable truth. You are no longer who they thought you were. And the most devastating part? You never had to say a word. Your growth did the talking. Your silence wrote the ending. Your evolution told them everything they needed to know, and everything they were too arrogant to consider when they had you. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And what you've done is an act of bravery. You've freed yourself from the need to be seen, heard, or understood by people who only recognized your value when it became inaccessible. That kind of freedom, it's rare, it's radical, and it terrifies those still stuck in their performance of pride. You're no longer proving yourself. You're not trying to make them understand. You've accepted that their misunderstanding of your worth says more about their limits than your value. That alone rewrites the entire dynamic. You've stopped chasing the closure they'll never be capable of giving, and in doing so, you've become the version of yourself they always feared you could be. Whole, unavailable, unapologetic. You're no longer reacting to the crumbs of attention. You've walked away from the table, and now they're sitting there with an empty plate, realizing the feast they once had is no longer being served. That's what absence does. It starves the ego that was once bloated on your constant presence. Let's be clear. This doesn't mean they'll tell you how they feel. Pride rarely admits pain. They may act like they're better off. They may laugh louder, post more, dive into distractions. But behind the performance is a mind slowly rewriting its own narrative, a mind replaying what they lost, a mind building you up higher with every silent day that passes. And when they finally break, if they ever do, it won't be because you forced it. It'll be because your absence did what your presence never could. It taught them that losing you wasn't a moment. It was a permanent shift. A shift they'll never recover from because they'll never again have access to the version of you who gave them endless chances. Right now, I want you to say this to yourself. My absence is my power. And if you feel that truth in your bones, drop it in the comments. Show them, show yourself, show the world that you are no longer waiting to be seen by people who closed their eyes when you were right in front of them. You are not lost. You are not forgotten. You are not replaceable. You are simply no longer available, and that, more than anything, is what they'll never be able to forget. Number 6. They'll try to trigger you because they can't reach you. When they can't access your heart, they'll aim for your reaction, because control was never about love. It was always about response. They won't come back with an apology. They won't say, "I miss you." That would require humility, vulnerability, and an admission that they lost something valuable. Instead, they'll come back in disguise. A like on your old post. A random story update designed to provoke emotion. A song lyric, a quote, a sudden online presence, crafted perfectly to make you wonder, is this about me? That's not love. That's strategy. Because when your silence holds longer than they expected, and your absence starts echoing in places they thought they'd sealed off, they panic. But pride doesn't let them admit it. So they try to get your attention the only way they know how, by trying to trigger you. Not to reconnect, but to see if they still have power over you. They'll test the waters with baited traps. They'll pretend they've moved on just enough for you to notice. Suddenly they're posting with someone new, trying to prove they've replaced you. But don't get it twisted. It's not about that person. It's not even about moving on. It's about you watching them move on. It's not real happiness. It's a performance, and you are the intended audience. And here's the part that gets overlooked. They don't do this because they're over you. They do this because you're finally over them. And that realization doesn't sit well, because in their mind, you were supposed to chase. You were supposed to break first. You were supposed to fold under the pressure of being ignored, but instead, you stayed quiet. You stayed calm. You stayed untouchable. And untouchable people drive manipulators insane. It's like this. Imagine a magician performing tricks. The illusion works only as long as the audience is captivated, but once you stop clapping, once you stop watching, once you get up and leave the show, they're just a person waving cards in the dark. That's what your silence does. It kills the spotlight. It ends the act. And now they're desperate for even a flicker of your attention to feel relevant again. They'll throw out hooks, and the old version of you, the one they remember, would have taken the bait, would have sent a message, reacted, engaged. But this version, the one who's healing, the one who's finally feeding their own soul instead of bleeding to feed someone else's ego, this version doesn't bite, and it's driving them mad. Because they didn't expect you to evolve. They expected time to break you down, not build you up. They thought silence would weaken you, not sharpen you. But here you are, glowing in the quiet, getting stronger in the stillness. And every passive-aggressive post they send into the void that gets no reaction from you is a mirror. They're forced to look at themselves, and what they see, it's not confidence, it's desperation dressed in pride. They're not trying to win you back. They're trying to win back the control they lost the moment you stopped dancing to their tune. And when you stop playing the game, they start inventing new rules, hoping you'll break yours. They don't want you back because they've changed. They want you back because they hate how you've changed without them. Let's destroy the lie that reacting means strength. It doesn't. Reacting is what they want. Reacting gives them proof they still live rent-free in your mind. Real strength is being triggered and choosing stillness. Choosing to pause, breathe, and recognize the pattern for what it is. Manipulation disguised as closure. And yes, staying silent in the face of provocation isn't easy. It takes more power to walk past a burning building without trying to put out the fire than it does to run into the flames. But here's the secret. That fire isn't yours to fight anymore. That chaos doesn't belong to you. It never did. You were just conditioned to believe you had to fix everything, but not anymore. Now, you protect your peace like a fortress. Zeno of Citium, the father of Stoicism, once said, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." And every time you choose not to respond to the bait, you're conquering yourself. You're proving, not to them, but to you, that your healing is stronger than their temptation. And they'll feel that. Oh, they'll feel it. They'll keep trying until eventually their tricks grow stale and their ego gets tired of being ignored. But by then, it won't even matter, because the version of you they're still trying to reach no longer exists. That version healed. That version evolved. That version learned that peace isn't found in being heard. It's found in walking away without needing to explain why. So when you see that notification, when they post that picture you know was meant to trigger something in you, when the memory tries to crawl back into your chest and ask, "What if?" Breathe. Smile. Because the moment you feel triggered is the exact moment they realize they can't touch you anymore. And that's the real victory. Right now, say it to yourself, "I don't respond to bait." And if that resonates with you, if you've ever felt your hands tremble wanting to reply, wanting to defend, wanting to engage but didn't, drop that affirmation in the comments. Let it be your proof. Show them. Show yourself. Show the world that you are not who you used to be. You are not reacting. You are not reaching. You are not returning to the person who had to scream to be heard. You are now the calm after the storm they created. You are the silence they can't manipulate. You are the power they can no longer access. Let them try. Let them provoke. Let them perform. You just keep walking, because nothing destroys a manipulator more than realizing they're no longer on your level, and they'll never be again. Number 7, your growth is their undoing. They expected your pain to break you. What they never expected was that it would build you. They thought the silence would destroy you, that you'd collapse without their presence, that the version of you they discarded would stay discarded, sitting in the dark, scrolling through old messages, waiting for them to come back and make it all okay again. But something else happened instead. You didn't break, you blossomed. And now, that evolution, it's not just a surprise, it's a threat. Because people who rely on your pain to validate their power don't know what to do when you stop suffering. You started choosing yourself, quietly, patiently, piece by piece. At first, it looked like nothing, just another person healing. But growth isn't loud. It's not a flashy transformation. It's those silent mornings where you decide to show up for yourself instead of mourning the version of you that depended on their crumbs. It's that quiet resilience you build in the gym, in your journal, in your stillness, when no one is watching. They were banking on your stagnancy. They expected you to pause your life, to shrink in their absence. They thought you'd make your entire identity about the wound they left behind. But you didn't make your pain your personality. You made it your power source. And now they're watching. Oh, they may not admit it. They may pretend they're not paying attention, but they see it. Every subtle shift, every glow-up, every moment you stop reacting and start radiating. And what does that do to someone who once felt important only because you needed them? It terrifies them. Because you're not just healing, you're evolving. You're doing the very thing they told themselves you couldn't do without them. You're becoming someone they no longer recognize, and someone they'll never have access to again. They'll start comparing. Not out loud, but in the back of their mind. Every person they try to replace you with will fall short, because when someone's ego convinces them that you were replaceable, your growth becomes a haunting reminder that they let go of something real. And real can't be recreated. It can't be duplicated, especially not by someone who still needs control to feel worthy. You were the one who held the space, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who forgave more times than you should have. But now, you're the one walking with boundaries, with vision, with peace. And that version of you is dangerous, not because you're vengeful, but because you no longer need validation to feel whole. And that's where their regret begins. Because people don't regret losing you immediately. Not when their pride is still feeding them lies. Not when their distractions still work. But over time, as those distractions fade, and the reality of who you've become hits them, they start to realize what they really lost. They lost the realest version of love they ever had. They lost the loyalty that stood by them, even in silence. They lost the person who would have fought to the end, had they just reached out with the same energy. But now you're not the same. You're stronger, quieter, focused. You're rebuilding a life so full, their name doesn't even echo in it anymore. And the more you rise, the more invisible they become. That's not revenge, that's nature, that's alignment. That's the world removing what no longer matches your frequency. Your growth becomes their undoing, not because you're trying to hurt them, but because it reveals just how much they underestimated your power. They thought you needed them to become something, but you became everything after they left. They assumed they'd always be your highlight reel, that no matter who came next, they'd remain the emotional blueprint. But now, every step you take forward rewrites that story. You're showing them without saying a word that they were never the climax of your story. Just a plot point, a lesson, a shadow that made your light more obvious, and it hurts. Not because they love you, but because they realize you no longer need to be loved by them to love yourself. Epictetus once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." That's what you've done. You stopped begging for closure. You stopped explaining your silence. You stopped chasing understanding from someone who refused to understand themselves. And now, you're responding with your rebirth. But let's be honest, growth isn't painless. There are days where the silence screams, where the urge to check in threatens your resolve, where nostalgia feels heavier than freedom. But you keep going. You keep rising. You keep pouring into yourself instead of leaking energy into someone who drained you dry. And every time you choose growth over reaction, their illusion dies a little more. They'll try to convince themselves that your transformation is fake, that it's for show, that it's a phase. But deep down, they know the truth. You're not acting different. You are different. And they'll never get to know this version, because this version doesn't just glow. It guards. It protects. It no longer accepts people who only show up when it's convenient. And that's the most painful realization for them. Not that you changed, but that you changed in silence. Without revenge, without theatrics, without needing to be seen. You let them go and became someone they never imagined you could be without them. So say this with your whole soul right now. I'm becoming everything they said I couldn't be. And if that sits in your chest like truth, drop it in the comments. Not to prove something to them, but to remind yourself of the power you're stepping into. Show them, show yourself, show the world what silent growth really looks like. Because your glow-up doesn't need their applause, your peace doesn't need their permission, and your future, it's unfolding in ways they'll never be invited to witness. Let them watch. Let them wonder. Because nothing shatters the ego more than watching the one they overlooked become the one they can never reach again. In conclusion, their silence was never strength, it was avoidance. But your silence, that was transformation. Let them pretend, let them wonder, because the version of you they remember no longer exists. If you're done chasing and ready to rise, like, share and subscribe, your glow-up has only just begun.